My fellow citizens, colleagues, and all who hold concern for our collective future, I thank you for your presence here today. For many months, I have stood before you and spoken of a gathering tension, a profound and fundamental realignment on the horizon. I have described it as a convergence, a point where numerous streams of crisis would merge into a single, overwhelming reality. I stated that a moment of reckoning was approaching. That moment is no longer approaching, it has arrived. This is not a sudden event born of chance or misfortune. It is the direct and inevitable outcome of a long series of choices made in closed rooms that prioritized expediency over equity, warnings that were dismissed as alarmist, truths that were too inconvenient to acknowledge, and so were willfully overlooked. We now face the consequences of those actions and inactions. We must begin with the economy, the very foundation upon which our national life is built. Yet, it is precisely this foundation that has been systematically weakened over a generation. The promise was that a rising tide would lift all boats, but that was a deceptive metaphor. The reality is that we built a system where the tide only rises in a few select harbors, while the rest are left to stagnate and decay. Our economic policies have been engineered not for the benefit of the multitude, but for the enrichment of a powerful minority. The architects of high finance, the lobbyists for international conglomerates, and the political elites who enable them have operated a system designed for one purpose: the maximization of short-term gains for a select few. The result, the relentless erosion of the working and middle classes, who now bear the crushing weight of soaring living costs, stagnant incomes, and the evaporation of secure opportunities. The inevitable rupture has now occurred. The fragile framework of this unsustainable model is collapsing under its own weight. The economic storm is no longer a distant forecast on the news. It is the present reality pressing down on every household, on every main street, in every community across this nation. Look beyond the statistics. See the human reality. Inflation is not a percentage point. It is a father in Ohio working 3 jobs to keep his family in their home. It is a recent graduate in California, their ambition suffocated by a mountain of debt before their career has even begun. It is a retiree in Arizona who played by the rules for 50 years only to find their savings rendered meaningless. This is the true face of our economic condition, not an abstract debate, but a daily grinding struggle for dignity and survival. For decades, those in power treated this growing inequality as a peripheral issue, a regrettable but necessary byproduct of a thriving market. They preached the false gospel of trickle-down economics, assuring us that wealth at the summit would eventually nourish the valleys below. We must now be brutally honest, it never trickled down. It pooled at the top, creating unprecedented fortunes on one end and fostering quiet desperation on the other. What makes this crisis so profound is that it is structural. We have constructed an economy on a foundation of consumer debt, on global supply chains stretched to their breaking point, and on a corporate ethos that prizes shareholder value above all else, including community well-being and national resilience. This model is inherently brittle. The successive shocks of a global pandemic, international conflict, and climate-driven disasters have proven this beyond doubt. And with each shock, the burden is never borne by the wealthy in their insulated towers. It is carried by the single parent choosing between rent and groceries, by the small business owner fighting to keep their doors open, by the student drowning in loans. This is more than an economic failure, it is a profound moral failure. It is a system that demands the most sacrifice from those with the least to give. The truth is, this crisis is not an act of fate. It is the product of a sequence of deliberate bad choices. Choices to strip away the regulations that protected our financial system. Choices to slash taxes for the ultra-wealthy and powerful corporations. Choices to weaken the bargaining power of labor and undermine unions. Choices to underfund public education and health care. choices to allow companies to offshore American jobs without consequence, all in the name of maximizing profit. These were not accidents, they were calculated decisions, and they have yielded the exact outcome we see today. While the public was distracted with promises of endless prosperity, the foundations were rotting. You cannot hollow out the heart of a nation, its middle class, and expect societal stability. You cannot treat human beings as disposable inputs in a machine and expect communities to thrive. The bill for this neglect has now been delivered, and the storm is upon us. Yet within every crisis lies a test of character. This test is not merely economic, it is political and moral at its core. Will we finally acknowledge that no economy can long endure when it abandons half of its citizens? Will we find the courage to invest in human potential, not just market indexes? Will we choose to build a new economy founded on the principles of fairness, sustainability, and shared resilience? Or will we continue to march eyes wide open down the same worn path of short-term greed and long-term decline? The stakes could not be higher. This is not about numbers on a spreadsheet. It is about the dignity of work. It is about the stability of our families. It is about the future of our democracy itself. You can see the consequences in the anxious eyes of parents, in the shuttered storefronts on our main streets, in the quiet resignation of those who feel they have been written out of the nation's story. The challenge before us is monumental, but within it lies an equally monumental opportunity, the opportunity to forge a new path. An economy built on fairness, on the full investment of human potential, and on the unshakable belief that prosperity must be broadly shared is not a radical dream. It is a practical necessity. The storm is here. It demands a response. The only question that remains is whether we will meet it with clear-eyed courage, or whether we will allow the corrosive forces of inequality to eat away at our societal foundations until nothing is left. When I warned of what was coming, I was not speaking solely of our domestic challenges. I was also pointing to the tectonic shifts occurring in the global balance of power, shifts that are fundamentally reshaping the international order. We now inhabit a world where the era of unquestioned American primacy is over. It is a finished chapter. And yet, our leadership continues to cling to outdated illusions of control and dominance. The geopolitical landscape is no longer stable or static. It is fluid, volatile, and increasingly perilous. What we are witnessing is not simply the rise of a single rival nation, but the fragmentation of an entire system, a system that for decades was underpinned by American-led institutions and alliances. That old world is gone. The new world emerging in its place is characterized by intense competition, deep-seated mistrust, and the ever-present potential for open confrontation. The shift I cautioned against has arrived. We now face a rapidly shifting balance of power that will determine whether this century is defined by constructive cooperation or destructive conflict. Observe the dynamics unfolding across the globe. China is no longer a rising power, it is a fully arrived peer competitor with an economy, technological prowess, and global influence that directly rivals our own. Russia, despite its significant economic weaknesses, has skillfully leveraged its military capabilities, its energy resources, and strategic partnerships to assert itself as a disruptive force on the world stage. Meanwhile, the nations of the global south across Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia have grown wary of an international order that treats them as secondary players rather than equal partners. These nations are now forging their own alliances, constructing new institutions, and demanding a rightful seat at the table of global governance. The multipolar world I described is not a future possibility, it is the present reality unfolding in real time. Yet, the response from our foreign policy establishment has too often been one of stubborn resistance rather than smart adaptation. Instead of adjusting our strategies to navigate a world where complex cooperation is essential, We have repeatedly defaulted to the blunt instruments of confrontation, sanctions, military posturing, and proxy conflicts. We see this in the increasingly tense standoffs with China over trade routes, technological supremacy, and the status of Taiwan. We see it in the dangerous escalations with Russia over Ukraine. We see it in the weakening of our oldest and most trusted alliances as partners grow wary of our unilateralism and inconsistent commitments. I warn that if the United States persisted in pursuing a foreign policy of raw dominance instead of thoughtful partnership, it would provoke a powerful and dangerous backlash. That backlash is now here. We are witnessing the active unraveling of a global order that was once built, however imperfectly, on a framework of rules and trust. It is being replaced by a world order defined by suspicion, rivalry, and the law of the jungle. This is far more than a grand strategic game played on a global chessboard. It has direct and severe consequences for every nation and every citizen. A fractured world order means disrupted supply chains that cause shortages and inflation at home. It means soaring energy costs that strain family budgets. It means new and dangerous arms races that divert resources from critical domestic needs. It means that pressing global problems, from climate change and pandemics to poverty and terrorism, go unaddressed because the great powers are too consumed with competing against one another to cooperate on solutions. The profound tragedy is that we know what effective international cooperation can achieve. We saw it in the aftermath of the Second World War, when visionary leaders built institutions like the United Nations and the Bretton Woods system precisely to prevent a descent into global catastrophe. But instead of reforming and strengthening those institutions to meet the challenges of a new century, we are allowing them to atrophy under the strains of resurgent nationalism and zero-sum geopolitical rivalry. The critical point is this: the world is not drifting toward chaos by accident. It is being pushed there by a series of deliberate choices. The choice to frame China not as a competitor but as an immutable enemy. The choice to escalate conflicts rather than to diligently pursue negotiated settlements. The choice to prioritize military spending and dominance at the total expense of diplomatic creativity and statecraft. These are choices that systematically close doors to dialogue and cooperation, while opening dangerous new pathways to miscalculation and direct conflict. History offers us a chilling lesson: when great powers refuse to adapt to a changing world, they do not preserve stability, they inevitably invite disaster. I told you this great shift was coming. Now you see its evidence in the daily headlines, in the broken links of our global supply chains, and in the growing public unease that a major war could erupt not in some peripheral region, but at the very heart of the global system. This power shift is not a problem we can wish away. It is a reality that must be managed with clear vision, strategic wisdom, and profound courage. The nations of the world are not asking for American hegemony. They are demanding a new deal based on mutual respect, fairness, and a genuine commitment to shared security and prosperity. Whether the United States can rise to meet this moment will determine not only our own national security, but the very prospects for global peace in the 21st century. The storm of geopolitical change is now upon us. The essential question is whether we will navigate these turbulent waters with wisdom and purpose, or whether we will allow ourselves to be pulled into an era of endless and debilitating conflict. When I spoke months ago about the gathering threat of climate change, I was not offering an abstract scientific prediction. I was pointing to the clear and visible evidence that our world was hurtling toward a point of irreversible crisis, a point where the issue would explode beyond scientific journals and policy conferences and into the center of our daily lives. That point has now been reached. It is no longer possible to deny the reality. The climate emergency is not a distant threat for our children to confront. It is here now, playing out in real time in the form of biblical floods that erase entire towns from the map, in apocalyptic wildfires that reduce vibrant cities to fields of ash, in lethal heat waves that make outdoor labor a health hazard, and in storms of such ferocious frequency and intensity that they defy historical precedent. I told you that something was coming. Today, the nightly news has become a relentless scroll of climate disasters, each one confirming the predictions and exceeding the worst-case models. The undeniable scientific truth is that our planet has entered a period of profound and dangerous instability. Polar ice sheets and glaciers are melting at rates far exceeding earlier projections. Our oceans are warming and acidifying, triggering the catastrophic collapse of marine ecosystems and biodiversity. These are not isolated or unconnected events. They are interconnected symptoms of a single planetary system breaking down under the stress of human activity. The damages are mounting with each passing year, measured not only in the tragic loss of ecosystems and species, but in hundreds of billions of dollars in economic costs, in millions of families displaced from their homes, and in countless lives cut brutally short. Climate instability acts as a threat multiplier, exacerbating food and water shortages, triggering mass migrations on an unprecedented scale, and fueling social unrest and political instability across the globe. The world is learning a hard lesson in real time. You cannot sever environmental health from economic health. You cannot have national security without climate security. The two are inextricably linked. And yet, despite the overwhelming clarity of the evidence, our collective response remains dangerously and unforgivably inadequate. World leaders make lofty speeches and commit to distant net zero emissions targets, but the on-the-ground reality tells a different story. Fossil fuel subsidies remain deeply entrenched in the economies of the wealthiest nations. Global carbon emissions continue to rise year after year. Political will for transformative action consistently collapses under the intense pressure of powerful industry lobbies and vested interests. When the smoke from a mega fire clears or the floodwaters finally recede, politicians inevitably arrive with promises of action and thoughts and prayers. But then, the cycle of inaction simply repeats itself. This yawning gap between rhetorical commitment and tangible action is more than just negligence. It is a profound betrayal of the public trust and a betrayal of future generations. It is the deliberate postponement of decisions that can no longer be delayed. I warned that the longer we waited, the more severe and painful the reckoning would be. That reckoning is now visible in every scorched landscape, in every submerged community, and in the eyes of every climate refugee. The urgency of this moment extends beyond merely preventing future catastrophe. It is about seizing the greatest economic and moral opportunity of our time, the opportunity to build a better world. The transition to renewable energy, the shift to sustainable agriculture, and the construction of resilient, modern infrastructure are not far-off fantasies. They are achievable, practical, and within our grasp. This transition can generate millions of high-quality jobs, dramatically improve public health, and create more stable and equitable societies. However, the pivotal factor, the one resource we are burning through with reckless abandon, is time. Each year of delay, each decade of half measures and empty promises makes the necessary transition more economically costly, more socially disruptive, and more physically dangerous. The window for effective, controlled action is closing rapidly, and yet the forces of denial and delay remain formidably powerful. The fossil fuel industry continues to wield enormous political influence, and too many governments still treat the climate crisis as a secondary issue to be managed, rather than the defining, overarching challenge of our era. This is not merely a technical problem of engineering and energy output. It is, at its heart, the ultimate moral issue of our time. It is about justice between generations who will inherit a degraded world they did not create, justice between nations, as the poorest countries that contributed least to the problem are forced to bear the most brutal impacts, and justice between the wealthy polluters and the vulnerable communities who are suffering the consequences. This inequity is staggering in its scale, and it is actively corrosive to any sense of global solidarity and trust. I told you that something was coming, and now we see it in the sun-baked farmlands, the burning old-growth forests, and the desperate lines of displaced families seeking refuge from regions that have become unlivable. The climate emergency is here. It demands from us not merely acknowledgement, but immediate and decisive action on a scale akin to a world war. The future of our economies, our political systems, and the very survival of our civilization depend on whether we treat this crisis with the utter urgency it demands. This is no longer a question of if or when. It is a question of what we do right now in this critical moment. We must understand that the eyes of history are upon us, and they will judge us harshly for the choices we make today. When I cautioned that something was coming, my warning was not limited to external threats like climate chaos or global power shifts. I was also pointing to a process of internal decay, a slow burning corrosion of trust within our own societies that has now reached a critical breaking point. Democracy, both here in America and in many nations around the world, is under extraordinary and sustained strain. What was once assumed to be stable and enduring now feels fragile and vulnerable. The very institutions designed to embody integrity, justice, and fairness, our courts, our legislatures, our electoral systems, are increasingly viewed by the public with deep suspicion and in some cases outright contempt. The warning signs have been flashing for years, clear for anyone willing to see them: steadily declining voter confidence, political warfare that prioritizes partisan victory over national interest, the rampant rise of sophisticated disinformation campaigns, and the steady erosion of accountability for those in positions of power. I told you that this moment would arrive if the foundational principles of truth and transparency were continually sacrificed on the altar of partisan gain. That moment is now here. We are living through an undeniable crisis at the very heart of our democratic governance. Travel through this country, and you will see the evidence not in statistics, but in the faces of your fellow citizens. A growing number no longer believe their voice matters or that their vote counts. They feel that elections are manipulated, that political debates are theatrical performances devoid of meaning, and that their leaders are utterly disconnected from the daily struggles of ordinary life. This widespread disillusionment is not born of apathy. It is the direct result of repeated betrayal. It is the product of promises made on the campaign trail that are promptly broken in office. It is the consequence of policies that are meticulously shaped not by the public interest, but by the interests of wealthy donors, powerful lobbyists, and an entrenched political elite. When people look toward their centers of power, they no longer see a system that represents them. They see a stage where access is sold to the highest bidder and where outcomes are dictated by power and money. The result is not mere cynicism. It is a deep and dangerous alienation. It is a chasm of mistrust that is widening between the citizenry and the institutions that are meant to serve them. The role of disinformation in this process of decay cannot be overstated. We live in an information ecosystem where lies, conspiracy theories, and manufactured outrage are designed to spread faster than verified truth. Algorithmic systems on social media platforms are engineered to amplify emotion and conflict over reason and nuance. The result is a poisoned public square. We now have entire communities living in parallel informational universes, each consuming a different set of facts. Consequently, the very concept of a shared, objective truth is collapsing. When a citizenry can no longer agree on a basic common reality, democracy cannot function. It ceases to be a system of debate, compromise,